Ren, how are you? Welcome. Thank you for
Yeah.
being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to see you, Hugo.
Hey, it's really good to see you. I wanted to warm us up with a little rapid fire questions. Are you
Okay,
up for
sure,
that?
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Hey, so I want to know what's a show that you can or a movie that you could watch over and over and not get tired of it.
The show that I can watch over and over and not get tired of is Taxi.
Oh, that's great.
The characters there's such a diversity of character types in that show.
Yeah.
They all come from different angles, but they're all basically cabbies. So, it's late 70s, early 80s New York, and so there's room to dream, but sometimes their dreams get dashed. And that show, I truly believe that show is one of the few that can make you laugh and cry at the same time. It's a beautiful, beautiful show.
And I love to see how a lot of like our favorite movie stars got their start and stuff like I enjoy those shows too.
Yeah.
So I want to take you back to Saturday morning and you're a young kid. What's playing on your TV?
Saturday morning, probably cartoons, but by the time I became like 12 or 13 years old,
Yeah.
for me it was I would record Nick at Night,
Oh,
so
very cool. Yeah.
so for me I would be watching Mary Tyler Moore, Dick Van Dyke Show, Rhoda,
Wow. Yeah.
anything from the 60s or 70s, reruns of Lucy, which you could find pretty much any time of day at that point. But for
Yeah.
me, it was always about sitcoms, even more than cartoons. Yeah.
It's so cool. Well, if you could spend one last day, one last episode on one of your previous sitcoms, which one would you want to go back to?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I mean, with Night Court, we ended on a cliffhanger, so I really want to know what's going to happen on that show. I'm like very invested in that show. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
something I watched since I was a before I could even put together sentences. I was watching Night Court, and then to end up working on it and directing on it and watching it, and so I would like to know, but I think the answer would actually be Call Me Kat because uh, I would want to go back to the time before we lost Leslie because
Mhm.
we were really hitting a stride as a show and we turned the corner on COVID. It felt like, I mean, the first episode that I directed was our first episode where we got to take our masks off. So,
Oh, wow. That's
I
awesome.
I remember Leslie saying, "I didn't even know you had a chin." So, yeah, like I'm mostly
Great
chin.
Leslie, by the way.
Thanks, thanks. Yeah, he's ingrained in my head. But I think I would go back there, just that very innocent kind of time where everything was still possible and we were all still here. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Would you be able to start with your name and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Ren Bell and I'm a dialogue coach.
Well, hey, Ren, would you be able to tell us a little more of what is a dialogue coach?
That's a great question. I have no idea what a dialogue coach is. If you figure out the answer to that, please let me know. Dialogue coach. Okay, so in multicam, the role is called dialogue coach. In single cam, the role is called acting coach. In theater, the role is called director. So it's a very interesting kind of subtype that exists in some shows. A dialogue coach might be as simple as just running the lines with the actors to make sure that they've got everything worked out in their heads, or if they have any questions about it, or if you perceive that there's some sort of hang up that's there, you can communicate that to your showrunners, to your writers, and just let them know ahead of time. You might say, the first half of this monologue is golden, but there's something sticky in the middle. I don't know what it is. The transition is not, it's not really sticking, basically. And it might be that the wording needs a little bit of adjustment. So you just give them the heads up for that. That's like sort of like the simplest version of it. But I never actually got to see a dialogue coach work before I got the job as a dialogue coach. So I sort of just invented what I thought would be the most helpful, most sort of like heart forward. And I say that because, you know, you can't know more than these actors who are multiple Emmy winners, Tony winners, nominees for all these awards. You're not going to know more than they know. Uh, However, you might be able to help them in a certain way, but you have to do it with a very clear intention. It can't really be about you. It has to be about the greater good of that scene or of their performance. And so I would say the most difficult aspect of the job is really gaining everyone's trust. once you've gained their trust, so long as you don't do anything to lose their trust, then you're pretty much golden because you're going to go through all the highs and lows of a show with the
Mm.
cast. And that's the glory of the job, is that you kind of get to live and die on the field with them, but then you sort of get resurrected for another episode the next day after you close, you know. So it's a really fascinating job. I don't know what a dialogue coach does. I only know what I do, which is, and I can be more specific about it. For me as a dialogue coach, I notate every single delivery that every actor gives from the table read all the way up to performing on camera. And I also notate once we get on camera which cameras those performances are live in. I don't think dialogue coaches do that as a rule. It's just I'm there. I'm watching the quad split, you know, so I'm watching all four cameras at the same time. I'm not watching the line cut. I'm looking to see, okay, these words came out perfectly and the performance was great on B camera, but maybe C camera had a better angle and maybe it was a two shot and maybe there was a reaction inside that. So I'm going to circle that for my own nerdy purposes. But it might be that, you know, the director has got a million things going on, and the director might, if they know me and they've worked with me for years, which is the case for a lot of directors, they may say, Ren, did we get that? And I can say, yeah, you got this, you got it on B, but there's a really great two shot on C that you should look at when you get back in. That director, if they really trust me, they might go they might say to the script supervisors, circle C camera on that take, and they may go look at it. It may end up in their cut, you know. So it's really about keeping your eyes and ears on everything at all times, so that if something worked at the table read but it's not working in front of an audience, you might have the answer to that. If they delivered it, you know, maybe the end of the sentence went up instead of going down, and you could say, you know, look at the table read, this felt more like a question than a statement, and it got a big laugh. Can we try a version of that? I'm not giving a line reading. The actor already did that. So they can sort of match where they were. And that's been very effective for me in my career. I think I'm more or less known as someone who can get kind of any performance out of any person. But it's a little bit of a parlor trick because in reality, I am notating everything that they do and every version that they do of it, which if you, depending on who you're working with, if you're working with like actors who do things differently every single time, that's, to me, it's always fun, but it can be challenging for sure.
Yeah, and I wanted to put focus on your work on the show Lopez versus Lopez. So, what was your approach when you were working with that cast, and also specifically with Mayan Lopez, who this was her first sitcom?
Oh, you know what? That's a great question. And I loved working on that show. And I was working on that show at the same time that I was the dialogue coach and a director at Night Court. And I was a dialogue coach on the pilot of Reba, or Happy's Place, rather. So I was literally running around that lot like a crazy person. But to me, I mean, that might be sort of like one of the peaks of my entire career because I got to go in all these different studios and sort of do my thing in front of a lot of really cool people. But Lopez was definitely a family vibe, and I remember that the laughs at Lopez. One of the reasons why I took that job was because it was like turning on a faucet. You know, I mean, just the laughs. They couldn't even use everything that was happening during a live show because so many reactive, funny things would happen. And I always thought I actually would have loved to have sat in the edit bay on that show because and it was Richie who did it. I would have loved to have seen how you would choose between different. There was just a lot going on over there. But basically, I got the phone call, and Mayan wanted a dialogue coach to sort of play off of, and she had done a whole season of the show, so basically she was learning on the from the ground up. She'd never done her own sitcom. But what was fascinating about Mayan was, for being someone in her 20s, she had this extensive knowledge of sitcom history and sitcom types. And so basically, when I became a dialogue coach on that show, it was really specifically working with her. And I thought, well, there's not a whole lot I can teach her because she has such a natural talent for it. But basically, I just became a sounding board for her. And so she would do, you know, when we would work the lines, she would play them so many different ways. And again, I was notating them. So for the first time, instead of her doing it in a vacuum and doing something really funny at the table read, and then thinking, well, wait, what did I do 3 days ago? Now that scenes have changed 6 different ways and costumes have changed 6 different ways, and you might not remember what you did 3 days ago. I was there. I was like right there with her going, hey, you did this really funny thing. And I learned a lot from Maya because she would name the versions of what we did. So sometimes she would be like, oh, this feels like a Rachel to me, like from Friends. And so, like, oh, it does, that line does feel that way. So we maybe play it that way. And then she might just change it to a Ross, or a Chandler. She might on the live show go, I have this other idea. And she would have names for them. So it really instructed me that not only should I be notating, but also we can name these things. And the more we name them and the more we remember them and we can put them in our kit of things to do during a live show. So for me, that show it was one of those things where I already had way too much work and I probably shouldn't have taken on another show. But I'm so, so happy for my experience over there. I laughed so much and I think I became a better dialogue coach because really my job with her was not to teach her anything. It was mostly to listen and to react because I mean she's so funny, so she would have me doubled over all the time. And so that became playful. So she and I sort of felt like two kids in a sandbox. And so that gave her, I think, just she was able to relax into it and do kind of whatever she wanted to do. And all of her best, most natural, most mind things came out of the fact that she didn't have to worry about what did she do 3 days ago. Somebody was there saying, hey, 3 days ago you did this. And you go, oh, yeah, right, right. Let's try that. So that was a blast for me.
What would you say is one of the biggest takeaways from your experience on that show?
Wow, that show had so much emotion in it that there can never really be another show like that because the show was built off of the real life relationship between Mayan and George. And so you can write things like that, but until you've witnessed it and lived it and watched them work it out, sometimes the episodes would be approaching things that were things they might not feel comfortable with discussing even in their real lives, but their characters on television are now having this discussion that maybe they never had. To me, I think it might be some of the most dynamic television I've ever seen. I'm thrilled that I got to be inches away from it and watch it happen on the stage. But I think the takeaway for me, I wouldn't even really know how to phrase it, but I'll try, which is that the reality actually, I think, is as essential as what's written in the comedy. How you get there, if it's not a real father-daughter relationship, I don't have the answer to that, but that reality really came through. And I think that they were able to break new ground in the sitcom format that no one else is really going to be able to tread into unless they had that exact kind of relationship. And I don't really quite see that possibly, but yeah, I think they broke new ground. And to me, that's like if you want to wear the crown for a minute, breaking new ground on a sitcom, that's hard to do.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that was a lot of what I was able to witness, just to be able to see the run-throughs and to see the live tapings was a lot of how that cast just came
Yeah.
together and kept evolving. And just to be able to see, like you said, from season one to season two, just how everybody kept getting into knowing their character.
Yeah, they really were able to sit into it and stew into it for those seasons. And I just those actors were all rhythmically so delicious. I mean, as a dialogue coach, I think if someone's interested in going into that world, it's to me that's all about music and rhythm. So uh, each of them had almost competing rhythms, but everything folded in this kind of beautiful musical way. So if you were watching that show, I mean, it cuts beautifully, but watching it live and seeing the way they play off each other in a live in an immediate way is so delicious. I mean, the audience would just be like leaning forward, like what's going to happen next? Did he really just say that to her? Because there were times when George might roast Mayan in front of the audience, both in character and not necessarily in character. And there were times when Mayan would serve it back, both in character and not in character. And the audience knows that. And so they're like, what are we watching? Is this reality? Is it sitcom? And is a really interesting hybrid. Yeah, yeah, I was really fascinated by that show. And yeah, I think it was gone too soon. I think there was more there.
Would you be able to take us into one of the most memorable episodes that you guys did at Lopez?
I would say one of the most memorable episodes was, I think it was at the end of season two. The way that it was written was really brilliant, where George pretends to be a priest, so he goes into the confessional box and everyone is confessing to George, but they think that they're, confessing privately. And so Mayan's character, Mayan, has to kind of go in there and confess issues that she's having with her dad and in her relationship and all these things. And so the tenderness of her performance there versus realizing that it's her dad in the confessional box and the chaos that ensues once he comes out and everyone's really angry that he did it. I really love that. To me, it felt like an episode of Frasier in terms of the high farce of it, but the stakes were very high emotionally. And so I thought that the way that that cut together and the way it played in front, actually when it played in front of the audience, it was quiet. And I remember the actors were like, why are they so quiet? And it's because they were so moved by the nuances in that scene. I thought that was really incredible. But another one for Lopez would be, they dealt with mental illness. So the character of George's mother comes back and is, at first you think she's this wonderful person, and she is, but she's also dealing with, extreme mental illness. And so they were able to go there, and the network went there with them. And so I think that Lopez versus Lopez had kind of agency that a lot of shows don't have, because the network can't always say, well, they can say we're not comfortable with this or that, but they can't say it shouldn't go like this, because if it's based on something that happened to George and Maya in real life, you can go, no, no, this is the way it happened. This is we need to explore this, because if we don't explore this, then what's the point of doing this show in the first place? So they were able to kind of get away with a lot. I think that's maybe the wrong way to say it, but they were able to break into new ground, that I think that other sitcoms don't necessarily have that same agency, because they're not based on something that's truly real. Coach, it's a department of two, right? It's the dialogue coach and the script supervisor. Script supervisor is your number one. That is the person, because they're the gatekeeper for all the words, and they are marking the takes that the showrunner or the other executive producer, sometimes it's the star of the show that's also an EP, might say, hey, can you circle that? They might approach and say, hey, can you circle that take? And the scripty will do that. It can also be the director. The director might want something circled for their cut. So really the gatekeeper is the script supervisor. So everything that you're doing, you want to communicate that with them well ahead of time. And they may already know it. I mean, scripties are so brilliant. They may say, that joke will never live. They'll know from the table where it's not, it could be a big joke and they might go, nah, I don't see it living. And then they're usually right. So you want to listen to the scripty. But we go in as a team, so like if there's a cut and then we got to go in and they're like, no, those words didn't come out right. Or scripty and I might divide and conquer, So I've worked with so many great script supervisors over the years, but it becomes a bit of a marriage, like, so on Night Court, for example, Susie, who's brilliant, she had this long-standing relationship with John Larroquette because she did the original series. So if there was something really tender that we were like, there's this piece that John's leaving out, and he might be leaving it out on purpose, but network might want it or showrunners might want it, and not everybody necessarily wants to have that conversation. But Susie could easily have that conversation because they had a 35-year relationship, basically. And so I might go deal with something else, and then we would connect back together and go, did you do this? Did you? Okay, great. And then she'll give the changes to the boom ops, or if in certain times she might say, hey, can you give these changes? So it's got to be a really, really, really good marriage, and there has to be like 100% trust there in order for it to work, you know? Yeah. And then I would say that as far as the showrunner, look, I mean, if a line doesn't sound right coming out of an actor's mouth, remember that if I have one conversation with someone, then I've already learned what their music is. If they grew up in East LA, they're going to be a little bit more staccato than if they grew up in Topanga, right? Their delivery might be a little slower, more, laconic. If they're from Hawaii, like, there's these rhythms, right? If they're from Alabama, there's these rhythms. And so I love speech and I love language. And so, I've already learned what sounds kind of right coming out of people's mouths. And so sometimes, the writers, sometimes on some shows, there's a writer that only writes in one person's voice. That can happen. But for the most part, they learn the rhythm as well. But they also might have jokes that are in a rhythm that is not native to that character or native to that actor. but it's a great joke and we want to get there. So as a dialogue coach, I might be like, can we make this and a but? You know, and you're like, please don't fire me, please don't fire me. Or it could be more extensive than that. Or the actor could say, this joke is really great, but I want to deliver it this way. If it's an actor who's won a lot of awards, they're just going to deliver it the way they want to deliver it. But if they're up and coming, or if the relationship with the showrunner isn't quite at that point yet, then I would basically partner with them to then go to the script supervisor and then go to the showrunner and say, hey, what if we do it this way instead? Or is there a world in which this version, but I have also been known to pitch jokes. I mean, you have to be careful doing that, but I think I've gotten about 70 jokes on air, actually. So I'm really proud of that, but I'm not in the WGA. So, but I think it's like you get to know these people and you know what really works for them. And if you're rooting for them and you want that laugh to live, um, if it's coming from, I'll always say that. You'll always hear me saying that. If it's coming from a true place, then probably it'll work, you know?
Yeah, how do you build that relationship and that trust with the writers and the cast specifically?
Yeah, you have to. I mean, it's always like, why is there a dialogue coach here? A lot of people go, well, who's the problem? Is it me? Is it? But it's usually not that at all. A lot of times you'll see a dialogue coach on shows for kids. I haven't done a lot of kid shows. I've almost entirely done adult shows. Um, but it's really about being a partner to that person. Or, in the case of Larroquette, I remember early on in the first season, he wasn't loving a particular line, but the line was essential because it was laying a little narrative pipe that we needed to lay, but it wasn't really flowing. And I remember saying to him, and I remember swallowing before I went in, I was like, well, this could be the end of me. You just never know. And so I said, hey, do you feel that Fielding might say this line in reverse? Like take the second half of this and put it on the first half, and then take that first half and land there. And I remember he scratched his beard a little bit and he looked at me and he goes, we'll see. And so I went back and I remember the showrunner was like, what did you tell him? And I was like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what just happened. Do I still have skin? Was I melted? And sure enough, he did that, and it did feel more like Dan Fielding. And I think because and the showrunner loved it, and it was no big deal. It was all the same words, just in a little bit of a different order. So, um, but I think that because I came from a place of asking, doesn't this sound more like Dan Fielding to you, rather than, hey, could you say this in the reverse order? I think he met me in the middle, and it was true. It felt more like that character, and I had watched so much of that I felt confident, sort of posturing in that position. But that paid off, and little by little, I began to earn his trust because he saw that I'm a really nice person, but I also really know my stuff. Like I'm a nerd for sitcoms, so I can easily have that conversation. But I was very grateful that he let me play with him in that way, and that began basically those were the overtures of a really great friendship that developed.
Yeah, I was really interested to ask you this part now that you're bringing up Night Court, because being such a fan of the show and specifically Dan Fielding, is that something that you revealed to John Larroquette or you just kept it to yourself?
You know what? Late, I did. I did it like in the third season. I told him because when I was really little, I was getting beat up at school, I was getting bullied. But Fielding was a hero to me because he was such a punk on the original show. Like he wasn't necessarily a good guy, right? But he was also really tender. He was wounded, and so you could see that his meanness, in a sense, came from this wounded bird. But the way that he would cut people down, I mean, and yes, I understand that those were scripts that were written in rooms. I would be hard pressed to not believe that Larroquette improvised or devised his own versions of some of those one-liners and quips and takedowns that Dan Fielding was so famous for. But basically, I learned how to defend myself verbally by watching Dan Fielding. Now, I grew up in the South, so I had a thick Southern accent and I had a lisp. And so I was definitely a target for bullies. But by the time I really learned how to speak, I could just cut them down really quickly, just cut them down to their knees. And so I learned that from Fielding. But then later, I got maybe a little too confident. Once I got socked in the face for it, I was like, maybe this isn't my native character. I'm not a Dan Fielding. Maybe I'm more of a Niles Crane. And that's fine too. But yeah, I did reveal that to John. I think he thought that was pretty delightful.
That's so great. That's always one of the things that I always find so rewarding when you finally get to collaborate with these actors and talent behind the scenes that you grew up watching. That leading me to what was it like working on a show like Call Me Kat with so many different types of acting?
Wow. Yeah, there were, that's a great way to put it, Hugo. That's brilliant. Yeah, it was so many different kinds of acting. That's exactly it. Everybody, but that's also what the strength of the show was. So, you have Kyla Pratt who came up as a child actor, and she came up on One, right? So she came up in a sitcom, so she already has this rhythm that she's playing. And then you have Mayim who obviously like started. I think she maybe started in like features and then eventually kind of, or maybe around the same age, she was already on television. I think so. But both of them, so to have two former child actors in a multicam meant that the rhythm would always, whether you were doing a B story with Kyla's character or an A story with Mayim's character, you always had someone who was really holding down the fort in terms of that native sitcom rhythm, but they had their own take on it as well. So Mayim, I mean, she could get three laughs off of one laugh. I learned a lot from watching Mayim. She could get three laughs off of one laugh. It might be just that the line itself was funny, but she might have a reaction to what was said to her before she delivered the line. So she would get the laugh on the reaction. She would have the delivery, which would get the laugh. And then she might have a little button at the end of it that she had another reaction to. I mean, it was so dynamic. She could make anything funny. And so, I mean, you have Swoosie Kurtz. I mean, look, you've got Julian Gant, who was somewhat of a newcomer, but he came up through, I want to say Groundlings. And so Julian would just, he could go anywhere. You couldn't pin him down. He could go anywhere. I'll say about Kyla too. Kyla could effectively smash a punchline over and over and over again. Um, and it would be different and equally hilarious every single time. I think that's such a skill. Whereas in comparison to say like Christopher Lloyd, which you and I worked with him on Happy's Place, every time he did something, and this is true of Larroquette too, it would be different. It would be different every single time. So you got to keep the camera on them. But with Kyla, there was this reliability that no matter if you had to move the cameras around or whatever, by the time you got back to her coverage, whatever she was going to do was going to be absolutely delicious. So Swoosie, I mean, Swoosie, Broadway giant, Swoosie could do more with three words. I mean, she could say three words, or she could do four words. She could say, I didn't know that. And the way that she would deliver it would be funny and would actually cut through another character. She was just lived in those words so truly. Um, and Cheyenne, who really, I mean, Cheyenne, this dynamic Broadway, big voice, big performer, could really play sort of these huge emotions, but then all had to be boiled down into something that was very grounded as well. So it was amazing watching him play for four cameras and then do it in just a single or a two shot, and watching his journey, because I'm not sure that he had ever done a multicam before that, but watching his journey of playing it playing for four camera basically over 3 years and refining that was really incredible. And then you have Leslie Jordan, okay, who is just he's just Leslie. Like you can't really manufacture a person like that. He's just one of a kind. If you ever watch him in Star Trek, you'll see that he plays a Klingon, but he's the only Klingon that ever had a Southern accent. I mean, he didn't really, he was just Leslie. And I think that was the joy of him. And also that was the product of him having lived an entire life towards the idea of being free to be who he was. He would always tell me he stood out in all the wrong ways in the time and place in which he was born and raised. But if you ever read his autobiography, or if you can get a copy of his one man show, or even interviews with him, you get a sense of what the struggles were for him to really fully embrace himself. But once he did that, he was free, and it's delicious. I mean, he became such a huge star during the pandemic because of his Vimeos or whatever they were, his reactions to basically being in lockdown. So I would say ultimately with Leslie, my job was always to do anything that kept him Leslie. So if he was really worried about some giant speech that he had, we might work that in advance so that he felt he didn't have to worry about the words. But there were times when he would say, just tell me how to say it. Just tell me, just give me a line reading. And I'd be like, there's no way I'm going to give you a line reading. Anything you say will be the funniest thing I've ever heard. He was just that unique, you know? So as you said, it was a cast filled with uh, completely different rhythms and musics. And then ultimately they came together. And on our best episodes, we would be howling, you know, in the camera aisle. It was just incredible to watch them all work together.
Yeah, what was one of the most memorable or inspiring scenes from that season or show?
Wow, that's possibly an impossible question to answer, actually. Um, I may not have an answer to that. I would say that what was exciting was, again, we made that show during COVID and we were the first show back. So I think what was so miraculous about it was that we kept showing up day after day to try to make comedy during an era when we were really scared.
Hmm.
You know, millions of people were dying, and we were trying to our version of we were on the front lines. I mean, we were considered essential workers, and when we went, and I was thrilled to go. I thought, well, if I'm going to catch something, at least I'm going to do it making comedy. And I think everybody, I don't know that anyone else said that out loud at that time, but I couldn't have been the only person who felt that way. It felt like a worthy endeavor to try to go in there. And eventually, you know, people did get sick, and it did spread, and all these things all through the lots all over town, and you'd stop filming or whatever. But just the idea that we had one in the can and that we were going to go back and make another one. And the rest of the world might have felt like it was falling apart, but we were there to make a show. That to me was the most miraculous thing about it.
Yeah, that's so great. And you're right about that, especially in a time that we were just not sure what was going to happen. And to
Yeah.
be asked to come in and make a hit show like that, that's really rewarding itself. And well, lastly, I really wanted to cover your experience on the Happy's Place pilot. Would you be able to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, Happy's Place is such a kind of a warm place in my heart because my parents actually still own a restaurant and bar. Like that was their retirement plan, was to buy the oldest restaurant in the town that I grew up in, and it has a bar attached to it. So, and being a Southerner, there's not a lot of Southern representation on television. So that's not, you know, Hee Haw or, you know, Petticoat Junction or whatever. We had Designing Women in the 90s. We had a couple of good ones, but ultimately to have someone who's so legendary like Reba, right? And Reba's certainly a legend in country music and in popular music, period. But also because of the show Reba, you know, she really showed that she's brilliant at comedy. You know, not just any kind of comedy though. Like she's brilliant at this format, at four camera comedy, and she's done single camera dramas. You can see her range is, I don't think you could quite pin it down, but getting to work really to watch her play four cameras at the same time, she was doing things that were so sophisticated. Like she might say something at the bar over here, and then she might turn and get the laugh on the turn. So when she turns, basically what she's doing is she's forcing the cut, right? So she's creating the edit through her own performance. You know, I've seen that here and there in other places, but I would say I've never seen it more consistently than I've seen with Reba. And I know for a fact that Mary Tyler Moore did the same thing, and I know that Lucille Ball did the same thing. So um, that is you could learn that, but she just knows where the funny is, and she knows if something's going to be funnier in the middle of the camera aisle or to one of the sides. So she might suggest that she changes her blocking a little bit so she can land in a certain place because something feels funnier on that side of the stage than the other. And turns out she's absolutely right. It's 20% funnier on one side of the stage than it is the other. That's an impressive skill. So for me, getting a chance to work on the pilot was brilliant, but also just watching her, you know, I mean, I think anybody that watches her is learning from her. I think she's absolutely brilliant. And then getting to go back over there a few weeks ago, I got the opportunity to to work with Christopher Lloyd and Carol Kane, who are these legends that, of course, I watched. I was a huge Taxi fan as a kid. And it was amazing. Not only were they brilliant, and as I said, Christopher Lloyd never does the same thing twice, right? So you just got to keep the cameras on him. Neither of them do. They're just so playful, and they trust that you're going to catch it. And of course, it's Pam Fryman, so she's got it all. It's all covered, and brilliantly so. So that was amazing. But the coolest part of that was watching Melissa Peterman and Reba like kids, just watching Christopher Lloyd and Carol Kane. And you can see that what makes those two actresses so brilliant really is not only do they have this sort of like native talent for it, they also love the format. And so that's sort of like the full circle for me is like if you love this format, if you're enthusiastic about it, if you grew up watching it, and you want to pursue it, I think you'll be successful for it just based on the enthusiasm alone. Some scripts are good scripts, some scripts are not good scripts, some scripts are in the middle, some scripts are brilliant. But your goal is to come back week after week and live a whole life with these characters. And in the meantime, you're watching these brilliant actors also find these characters and also find themselves on stage in certain ways. You talked about Lopez versus Lopez. That's true with Reba too. I mean, she's playing this other person, she's playing Bobby, but there are moments I've seen on stage where those are real Reba moments. And that I think that's the key to pulling the audience in is, yeah, you're showing them something that's written, but you're showing them a kind of real life that they only see in real life, but it's elevated because it's a comedy. I think it's a I think it's I still think it's the most brilliant format of television, as exciting as single camera is, or as compelling as single camera can be. I think the most exciting television is multicam.
Well, for those young people that are interested in becoming a dialogue coach, what advice would you give them?
Every single opportunity that you get could come from any angle. So be aware of that because if you talk to lots of different dialogue coaches, they come from different places. I was a theater director and a theater teacher, and someone saw some plays that I directed. Well, actually, it's not just someone. It's this brilliant television director named Don Scardino, who's, one of the gods. And basically he said, "Hey, you're a television director. I want you to shadow me and, maybe you can hack it as a dialogue coach and work your way towards that goal." And that's precisely what I did. Uh, but some dialogue coaches you might start out as a stand-in. You could be stand-in on a show and then eventually you're running lines with everyone else and then you've got a position on that show as a dialogue coach. I know I've seen it where some script supervisors become dialogue coaches and then become acting coaches and become directors. There's so many different ways it can happen. So I think in order to do it, you need to know as much about acting as you possibly can. I think it helps to be a good actor. I don't think I'm a great actor by any stretch, but I'm good. So I'm confident enough to be able to have conversations with actors who are well above where I am, and still be able to tread water with them. So I think you want to study as much acting as you possibly can. And specifically, again, in the single camera world and in film, I'm an acting coach. So that feels like it has more weight to it. I don't know why it's called a dialogue coach in multicam. I've never really asked that question. But I suspect it's just because the rhythm with which you work with the lines in a multicam, everything is rhythmic. The jokes follow a certain kind of pattern that's been around since the really late 40s, early 50s. So the more you know about sitcoms, the better your chances are. And then I think you have to make friends with producers. I think there's a lot of that. The networking part of it is key. And I didn't really know any producers when I got in, so I've just sort of slowly amassed a group of producers that I work for that's based on sort of the quality of my work. But I've sort of done it kind of a long, meandering way, which I think is also great. So I think the answer is know as much about acting as you possibly can, know as much about staging as you possibly can, and learn how to be a plumber. A great dialogue coach is a plumber. Things don't always work, and you need to understand. I think with multicam, you can close your eyes and you can listen to it and identify where the quote unquote problem is. It might be that the word isn't just right, or it might be that there needs to be a comma instead of a period, or maybe there needs to be a period instead of a comma. Maybe the speech needs to be separated more. Um, Knowing that and feeling that and having just a sensibility for that, that's what's going to go towards you winning the trust of the actors. And if you win the trust of the actors, then you'll basically win the trust of the producers, you know?
Well, thank you, Ren. Beautifully said. I appreciate the conversation and I look forward to collaborating with you again.
Yeah, I feel so lucky that I usually get to end up with you on set. To me, it's always you're a good luck charm. So, it's I will also say, look, the industry's in an interesting time period, but multicam sitcoms are not going to go anywhere. They're as unique
Yeah.
an American art form as jazz or rock and roll, right? This is something that in this country we developed with Ricky and Lucy, Desi Arnaz, who is just a genius in our field. Like we still do it the way that Desi envisioned it. And I think that's really important. And I think we will continue to make sitcoms. And my hope is that young people will watch this format and see that, with multicams, you can change people's hearts and minds by making them laugh. You know, Not
Yeah.
everything has to be so pointed. At the moment that this is 2025, so we're living in a country that feels torn, from both sides. But the middle ground is making people laugh. And if you
Yeah.
make people laugh, what you find out is that you have more in common with them than than differences that you might have. And so I think that multicam sitcom is part of the sort of medicine that we all need in order to sort of like reconstitute what's so great about our society. So my hope is that young people will watch some sitcoms. I mean, there's so many to watch, but I would say, just start watching them and fall in love. Again, it's like if you have a funny family, if you're in a family situation where people make each other laugh, or maybe they're down on each other a little bit, but the laughs are coming from a good place, it's coming from love, it's tough love, whatever, then replicating that kind of dinner time conversation, or Saturday at the park conversation for other families through the medium of television is so effective in just creating good vibes for everybody. So my hope is that it's contagious, but it's not going to go anywhere. It might have ebbs and flows, but I think multicam sitcom is certainly something worth uh, investing some. I mean, look, for me, it's ride or die. I do other things, but I think what I want to be most proud of when I look back on my career years down the road will be the sitcoms that I made.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why the Friends reruns are still going strong and why Big Bang Theory keeps charting. And hey, like you said, we all enjoy this form
Yeah.
and yeah, we can't
Well,
wait to keep
the
working
other
on
thing I would say is that for people who don't fully know, I mean, we're making a play every week.
it. Mhm.
So like if you had a great time doing your high school play or whatever it is, like we're doing it every week. And we're grown-ups, question mark, but we're kids. I mean, we're still living I think the kind of excitement of being young artists. If you if you do multicam, you don't really ever have to grow old in a way. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I agree.
yeah. You will feel old. Let me clarify. There are moments when you will feel old, but you don't have to be old. It's good. It's good for you.
Well, I'll see you on the lot, Ren. I'll see you when you get here.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Hugo. Thanks for your time. This has been great.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.